welcome to another episode of the Bonsai Wire podcast. I am Jonas, here with...
Eric Schrader, and one of these days, Jonas is going to let me do the intro.
Oh, you want to do an intro?
No, go ahead. I think we're already done.
And today we're going to be talking about the Expo. We have been doing a ton of fun work and wanted to give you another update about that and focus specifically on the jurying and judging process. But before we get to that, a little quick catch up on what's coming up next and what we've been doing so far.
So I just put all of the ticket types on the website. They're not live, just depending on when you're listening to this, but I have all of the tickets and we're testing our ticket app. So that's coming very soon. It's the May 24th right now, and hopefully by the first week of June.
So very soon, tickets will be on sale. The other thing we did is that we've wrapped up the submission period. And we have a whole bunch of great submissions. We're absolutely thrilled at the trees that people, that you all submitted to be included in this year's exhibit.
Yeah. Now, I just want to reassure everyone, I'm going to talk about having seen some of these, but I don't know who they came from, apart from obviously knowing certain people's trees already, but I've only seen anonymized versions of the trees.
One of my jobs is to coordinate with our volunteers all of the submissions as they come in. So we get the emails, we follow up with additional information we need, and then we set up the jury environment. And that's where Eric and I were looking through some of the trees earlier. And in general, I would say night and day difference, the submissions this year from last year.
9 day, huh? I mean, it's pretty impressive. There are some trees that I saw that kind of blew my socks off. Trees that I guess we hoped for last time, but maybe just didn't get submitted.
Well, what's interesting is having different or better overall submissions doesn't necessarily make a stronger show. It just makes the job for the jury a lot harder.
Well, I was thinking exactly the same thing, because when you have 5 originally nursery grown Shimpaku with the same stripe of deadwood up the front and just slightly different branching and slightly more detailed or less detailed silhouettes, you really have to get down to, okay, well, 1, do I want this type of tree in the show? And then 2, which one of these is actually the best?
And we've been really surprised by what categories are going to be competitive. We won't say too much about the specifics, but we've been surprised. Some individual species that were very poorly represented last time were just rich in submissions in these species. And the same thing goes for sizes. We have a good mix across all of the, 8 categories we have this year. But it's funny. It'll be really an interesting exercise, I think, as a judge this year.
And a lot of onesies and twosies of odd species that's going to make it hard for myself and the other jury members to really decide, do we want more actual species diversity, or do we want more style diversity, or how do you strike the balance when, as a jury member, in terms of which priorities you have?
That's right. And so the instructions we give to the jury incomplete is give us the best diverse show possible. That's about all we say. That quality matters. We want the absolute highest quality, but that we want the jury to consider diversity. And that's diversity of not only species and style, but also sizes. So we can have a really good mix of everything in the room. And we've got the submissions that can support that. But like Eric said, there are going to be some really interesting choices. Well, this tree may not look as good as the other, but we already have 3 of that species. But this is a really fun species. It would be fun to add to the exhibit, but it may not be as well developed. And so I think it'll be a really interesting, we're kind of dying to see what's going to happen.
We hadn't talked about this previously, but one of the things that kind of struck me was that some trees are styled in sort of a historic way, like based on a styling that you would see more 20, 30 years ago. But it's not like you can actually pivot style-wise with some trees. I mean, with deciduous trees, you would have to just rebuild the entire tree. So it will be interesting to see if the sort of history of styling in the United States ends up playing a part as well, because some of those older sort of eras, we saw a little bit more straight trunk kind of deciduous work, and not as much dynamics in the branch work and the crown, maybe, or just very quiet compositions.
Yeah, trees that look like, quote, bonsai.
Yeah.
And there is some of that. The other thing we're noticing this time is so to tell a little more about the submissions last time, I think both this year and last year, we received roughly 170 submissions. And last time, I'd say the top half of the trees were pretty good quality, and then the quality dropped off a little more precipitously than it did this time. This time, it's pretty darn solid submissions until the very, very tail end of the list. What is different this time is that we have dozens of trees that are easily good enough to get in, but they may not be as developed as we might want to see for a show like this, or as the owners might not want to see. So a lot of the trees, we have no questions at all about whether or not they're good enough to get in, but when's the right time to get them in? This year, 2 years out, 4 years out, 10 years out. Which just brings into question the same thing that came up for so many of us at the show last time, is how do you compare time in training versus the inherent characteristics of the tree?
I don't know why that just brought to the forefront of my head that we don't actually provide feedback to people whose trees are not accepted to the exhibit, and that's just really down to us not having time to do that. But
well, that's something I want to offer for next time. And I was trying to think in ways to do that, because some people will submit trees and we actually really, really want to say a little bit of feedback for it. But if it's not requested, it might not come off the right way. And so I was almost thinking if they could put a checkbox next time and say, oh, please provide information to help me strengthen my submission for next time, or something like that.
I think where I was headed, though, is that just because the tree is not accepted to the exhibit doesn't mean, like Jonas just said, it doesn't mean it wasn't good enough to be in the exhibit. It might just mean that there happened to be too many of that species, or that, a year or two from now, it will be much better than it is right now. So if you submitted a tree and it's not accepted in 2022, and you submitted a tree, it's not accepted in 2024, there's no reason that you should not submit that tree again in 2026, even if it's the same tree, just with 2 more years worth of branch work.
That's true. That's the far more important point, that it doesn't mean the trees doesn't make the match. It just means it didn't fit this year in the event.
Yeah.
And I know in our own submissions, Eric and I talked about this, where you just kind of submit a few trees and you don't worry about what is or isn't going to go in, because we don't know what's going to be coming in. I'd say last time, I think we were very late in getting our submissions in, but we were all pretty early this time, you, me, and Andrew. And so we had no idea what was coming in when we submitted, which was kind of fun. But you don't worry about it. You just put in a couple, you cross your fingers and hope for the best, and just know that, well, what can I do to strengthen that for next time if it doesn't fit in for whatever reason? Now, the other thing we did to hedge against this is last time we selected 3 jury members, and we selected pretty much the 3 most prominent names we could come up with Bjorn Bjorholm, Bill Valvanis, and Ryan Neal. And we were thrilled that all of them agreed to participate last time.
It was really fantastic, and I have a lot of thanks for those 3 professionals.
Yes, huge kudos to all 3 of you. We'll also say that we were surprised, puts it mildly, at the different trees they all selected. It was such a great example, and we just don't get a lot of opportunities to see this ever in bonsai events, really worldwide, how different people's opinion are on what makes a quality tree, what makes a great tree, what makes a great exhibit. They each brought really different sensibilities to the jury process, and we're all thrilled with how it all averaged out between everybody. But they really went in very different directions. And I'd say those directions in many cases reflected not their likes and dislikes as much, but at least their kind of understandings of what they think a great show should be.
Right. And what we were just talking about, it kind of reflected some of that, where one juror might have said, "Oh, I want to see more diversity of species." The other juror maybe selected trees based more on the
time and
training, or the silhouette as it appears in the submission photo, or something like that. So,
and the third person might want to see the inherent characteristics of the tree, and we could pretty much say you could guess which of the three were those three characteristics. But what was cool is when we have multiple people contributing, what we're talking about is building consensus. And that's what really speaks to the community-based model of the event in its entirety, which is, where was there consensus? Where did multiple people select the same trees? And I think in every case, multiple people had to select a tree before it was recognized and included in the event.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think where towards the tail end, like you said last time, the quality kind of dropped off a little bit more steeply as we got towards the trees that were not accepted to the exhibit. And I think that for that reason, because there was a little bit of fuzziness in the jury results, because in the end we had to break it all down to math in order to be able to really distinguish, how many trees got how many points or whatever. And so we essentially gave, 3, 2, or 1 points based on how the jurist had categorized the tree, and then averaged or added up those number of points. And it was towards the tail end of the submissions that it got a little bit, just not quite enough data.
Right. And so what we do is we provide an environment where it's a software environment where they see the photos of every single tree, the height of the tree, and the name of the tree, and that's all the information they get. And then we just ask them to simply put the trees in buckets, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, or not selected. And that's where we add those points. And we tried a number of different point systems, and I forget which one we ended up with, but we noticed that depending on how many points, and this is already in the weeds, you assign to each bucket, that had a big effect on what we as show organizers are saying matters. If you give 100 points for bucket 1, 50 for bucket 2, and 10 for bucket 3, then what you're saying is it matters that you're someone's top choice. Whereas if you go 3, 2, 1, what you're saying is consensus is what matters most. That it could be number 3 on everyone's list, and that's worth as much as one person saying yes and 2 people not even selecting the tree. And so I think it's fair to say, yeah, I should actually look up what we did. We'll have to do this again very, very soon.
I think it ended up being 3, 2, 1.
It was pretty simple.
But
because we wanted more people's input to nominate that tree before it made it into the show.
Right. But the takeaway, or the evolution from that, is that we decided, instead of having 3 jury members last time, that we were going to have 5 jury members this time. And
there was no hesitation about that.
No hesitation whatsoever. Yeah.
This was before the last show. We thought, this is great. We're going to do more next time.
And I think we should just go over who the jurors are and what they bring to the table, just like the jurors from last time did.
Yeah. And the first one I mentioned is our only returning jury member. We thought about doing all new jury members this time, but we wanted to bring one back because we thought he had a lot of excitement about the event and he wants to come to the event this year, and because we thought he had a really good perspective, and that's Bjorn Bjorholm.
Yeah, and so Bjorn, now back in Japan after having started and then closed down a nursery in the United States, one of the most prominent bonsai professionals in the world, I'm going to say. And I think that he's excited about the event, and he was very happy to be a jurist again. So we're excited to have him back and hope that he can attend this time, which I very well may happen.
It's in the schedule right now.
Nice.
Which is pretty great. And so the other 4 jury members are all new. And so that actually hints at, why would we want all new jury members? And we know a lot goes into being a good jurist for an event like this. And I will say that I don't know that we've got a huge, deep pool of 100% qualified jury members that don't have close associations with this show. Like, I just don't know that we have that available to us. But we want to work as hard as possible to start creating that. And we thought that by having more people participate in the jury, the more we could start challenging them with this task, the more they could start thinking about these topics, the more they could start learning and bringing these learnings to other events that they participate in. Hopefully, the more we're doing to kind of strengthen what the overall thinking about what goes into creating these kinds of events in the future, which can get to one of our very next people on the list, Todd Schlafer, who we're thrilled to have as part of the event because Todd brings an awesome perspective. He's from a different part of the country than us, from the middle of the country up in the mountains, and brings an awesome perspective about working with Native American materials.
Yeah, and so as opposed to Ryan, Todd, I apologize if I get any of this wrong, but Todd actually apprenticed with Ryan Neal. Sorry, I think I said Ryan, as opposed to Bjorn. Todd apprenticed with Ryan Neal, so he did not go to Japan. Completely different perspective on, creating material, and he's now running his own education and nursery in Colorado, outside of Denver, I believe.
Yeah.
And so he has a bunch of customers. He teaches classes. This is a person who has a very deep knowledge of the American bonsai scene, and yet a completely different experience than Bjorn.
Yeah, and we also know that that last point you made about Todd, he's been traveling tirelessly from what I understand. And that offers a lot of broad perspective about what other organizations are doing, what they are selecting for their exhibits. And we thought this would be an awesome way to start including Todd in our event, to start contributing in the form of a jury member. And he was thrilled to help out. So very, very happy. Thanks, Todd, for choosing to join in with us.
And then the third jury member this time around is going to be Michael Hagedorn. And if you are listening to this and don't know who Michael Hagedorn is, you should probably check the notes at the top of the podcast, because he's actually a regular podcaster.
Yeah, he's one of the hosts of this program. So, and Michael actually was one of the jury members for the Artisans Cup back in 2015.
That's right. And he studied with Shinji Suzuki in Japan for a number of years. Shinji has also turned out a number of other apprentices, and Michael has been a full-time professional in the United States for 20 years now.
It's been a long time whenever he got back.
Maybe not quite 20, but it's been
a bunch now. And one of the cool things about where Michael studied is he was one of the only apprentices who actually got to engage display-related topics, in that they had to set up displays daily in the workshop at Suzuki's Garden. And so while that's not necessarily thinking of the trees as a jurist per se, but it's attention to detail, it's attention to how to create a display and how to create an experience for things that we know is definitely not common among apprentices, which grunt work is a far more common attribute of the job. Not that you didn't shovel snow, Michael, as well. Like, everybody gets to do some good exercise.
Winding up hoses in perfect ovals.
Yeah, exactly. But when you're working in an absolutely beautiful garden and you're trying to make it beautiful for your visitors every day, then yeah, that's going to give you a different eye for things. And so Michael, like Bjorn, trained in Japan and has a spectacular eye for the Japanese approach to how bonsai is done, but has worked in this country long enough to have a really good understanding about how it's practiced here as well.
And I'll just add, one of the most heavily discussed displays from the 2022 Expo.
Yep.
Very well done, Michael. And we're really excited to have you as a jurist for this go-round.
Yeah, something else that Michael brings to the table, of course, is being a full-time ceramicist for many years before even going to Japan to study bonsai. He will have more background and depth of understanding of the artistic effects that the container selection is going to have on the composition.
And the challenges of creating good
ceramics.
ceramics.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Let alone how to make it. That's right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thrilled to have Michael.
So then next on the list is Dave DeGroot.
Yes. David, who started practicing bonsai in New Orleans and has achieved international renown as the initial curator for the Pacific Bonsai Museum, which was then the Weyerhaeuser collection.
He was also one of the, if I'm not mistaken, paid judges for the Artisans Cup.
Yep. And so we can
5.
see all of his scores and listen to his commentary actually on the Artisans Cup website. And we highly recommend you check that out. There have only been a small number of kind of non-affiliated, bonsai events in this country's history. You've got kind of the National Show and the Artisans Cup, and we're hoping the Expo, that it's a small list that aren't done by regional organizations, essentially. And what was cool about the Cup is among many other things, is the way their approach to jurying and judging was fantastic. And the capturing of commentary on every single display in the show from every single judge is just unparalleled in big events like this. And you can actually see all of David's commentary on the Cup website to this day. Just look up, I think it's theartisanscup, possibly.com.
I don't know how they have
we'll
time
check
to do that. I mean, it seems like it would be a massive amount of work to write a blurb about every tree in a show.
Yes. They're audio, and so they had to speak a blurb about every single tree in the show. I think that's how it was. But yeah, pretty awesome. But Dave's been a good friend for years, and he has yet another unique perspective, I think, among the jurors, that he will know more about Peng Jing than anyone else on the jury. He will know more about bonsai practice internationally. And he did author the single book on bonsai design of any note pretty much in the Western world. And we'd highly recommend you check that out if you have any curiosity at all on the topic.
I think my takeaway from that book, I have a copy of the maybe second edition, the one that nobody liked the layout of, Dave least of all. And the takeaway is that it's very technical.
Yeah.
Like the book has a lot of math in it. It has, these things, which actually, when I think about it, there was a little bit of that in Naka's book back from the 60s. But that sort of mathematical or musical or whatever you want to call it approach to analyzing bonsai and trying to boil it down to not a formula, but something that people who have kind of technical minds that can approach it from that direction other than just sort of feeling.
That's right. And Dave has contributed to so many shows over the years. We think he has an awesome perspective. And just based on those four names you just heard, what is the similarity going to be between what they pick? Who knows what they bring to the table? That's an awesome bunch of diversity for just a very small number of people right there.
All right. And so then me being the last member of the jury, I'm not sure what my qualifications are. You want to explain?
I think you can then make a case for us now. What you will. One thing we actually thought of, so as we were deciding what the jury panel would be this year, we thought, let's have a member of the organizing team on the jury and just see how that goes. We'll see if any issues come up. We'll see how that feels. And so I've been managing the front end processing of everything, and we're keeping Eric in the loop about how things have been going, but Eric's going to be participating as a jury member. And so he gets to see the exact same jury environment everyone else does. Now, your perspective will be similar to Todd's in that you have not studied in Japan. You were not a curator of a public garden for decades.
I just thought it was because I have a YouTube channel, but maybe not.
The YouTube channel, probably pushes you over the top into that category.
No, I mean, for those of you who don't know my full background, I started in about 2001 doing bonsai, and I studied with Boone, just like Jonas did, for about 10 years, taking essentially a full day workshop every month for about 10 years, studying with Boone. And during that time, I also traveled to Japan, going to the Kokofu exhibit 4 times, I believe, buying lots of pots and following Boone around, kind of trying to figure out exactly what he was looking at when he said purple clay, because I'm partly colorblind.
Exactly. And one thing we learned in studying with Boone, which we've mentioned so many times in other episodes, is we actually practiced tree evaluation 3 or 4 times a year, literally explicit written exercises. Just in club meetings, we did that. We practiced display at 100% of club meetings for 20 years. We then evaluated every tree in the exhibit for a lot of years, or at least the primary contenders for every category at every single exhibit every year. And so we just kind of grew up in this environment of evaluating trees, trying to create meaningful displays. And that's just how you participate in bonsai. That's just what it means to play bonsai.
I actually physically had to, as the photographer for a number of years,
gosh.
physically reset up every display in order to shoot it, the photographs of it. So I got a lot of practice with resetting displays, making sure that the fronts of trees and round pots are displayed correctly and the stand is aligned properly for the photograph and all those sorts of things.
Yeah, and so coming from a photographer background and an artistic background like that, that's a lot of years you were involved in the photography for BIB. It was more than 10 years, I think.
I don't remember how long it was.
I actually photographed the show. It was the second or third show ever I did the photography, and then within a couple years of that, Eric started helping and or doing the photography for over a decade. And so that gives you a very different eye when you think about where do you place the camera, how do you light things, what are you looking for to show off in the tree when you're sharing it, which is just a different artistic skill to just making a tree that looks pretty in front of you.
So in aggregate, what we're hoping from this jury is to get more data, essentially, so that it's very clear what the jury as a whole is intending to put into the show. And it'll be really interesting to see the diversity of backgrounds in the jury, how diverse the selections are and how much overlap there is.
Because there's going to be a small number of shows, some percent of the trees, we don't know what. Everyone's going to say, yeah, that has a place in this show. And so fine, there's, 15% of the show. And, a lot of submissions won't get any recognition. We'll say, fine. There's going to be a large number of trees, and we're just dying to know which of those build consensus. And then we'll be able to have the same conversation a year from now and say, these are the kinds of patterns we saw that the jury, that spoke to the jury. These are... they did look for time and training in this fashion, or they did look for, inherent characteristics, or they did choose diversity versus quality in these other cases. Like, we don't know, but we'll definitely share all of this stuff. I remember last year, we only somewhat cheekishly said that the two strongest biases of the jury were for clean work and good photographs. Yeah. And that's very real.
And the cleaner the photograph as well, the better. So if you can, if you, in your submissions, obviously they're closed for this year, but as we move forward with future expos, the photography does become very important. Not only the backdrop, the lighting, making sure that the tree is well presented, all those things.
Showing it in winter without foliage if it's deciduous.
Yeah. I mean, it's really important to put your best foot forward if you want to get it past the jury.
And so we're going to make, every year we want to do more and more explicit instructions. And so this year we provided a lot more detail than we did the previous year. Next time, I think we're just going to include photos. No, really, hold the camera at this height, this far from the tree, and then we'll give samples of photographs that are and aren't acceptable for the jury, because if you can't tell what you're looking at, it's going to be a lot harder for that jurist to go out on a limb unless they're familiar with that tree personally.
Yeah, and Jonas has been slaving away behind the scenes, cropping and brightening, and
yeah, that's one of our dirty little secrets is that I actually edit all of the. Oh gosh, it's not a full 1,000 photos, but not far off. In my free time, I'm literally cropping and editing and touching up all of these photos, because if they don't show up at their best in the jury environment, I think a lot of good trees wouldn't even begin to make it with the photos as submitted. So when we ask you for another photo, when we ask for additional information, it's really to make sure your tree has the best fighting chance. We have the bias of wanting the show to be as good as possible, and we know that the fairer the fight among all the trees, the better. And so that's why we're going to efforts like this.
Yeah, the point of cropping and modifying the photos is to make everything look as photo-wise as close to all of the others as possible, so that the jury can then pay attention to the trees themselves rather than slaving away at like photos that are too dark or too bright or whatever.
It's actually making me think it might be fun to show. We might even mock up a kind of a fake exhibit, and we can kind of demo what the jury process looks like in the software environment. Because I know some people out there, you run your own exhibits. This might be something that you want to try, but just to see kind of what it is that people can look at and how they can adjudicate the show.
I mean, all of this stuff speaks to how much we are trying to engage with the community as a whole in order to, not only educate, but push forward kind of the knowledge and perspective that people have on juried and judged shows. And there's, we all get so in the weeds with like, is my tree healthy? Is, did I get it wired or unwired? And this is almost a whole different thing, but I think we want to push all of you to really pay attention to display, to really pay attention to judging, and jurying being just a pre-judging, essentially. It's almost the same thing as the judging panel, which is in our case, the exhibitors, once you get to the exhibit.
In the art world, there's a lot of different approaches to juried exhibits, and sometimes it's quality, but more often it's a theme. And so often what will happen is an organizer of an event will choose someone to put together the exhibit, and their job is to kind of they may be presented with a theme and then to choose trees that meet a theme, for instance, or, artworks in that case. And there's a lot of ways to do it. And so we've thought about a lot of these models, and we're actually always on the edge of making little tweaks from year to year to see what would provide the most interesting results. But we actually want to keep growing the pool of jurists over time. And we have not begun to think about what we want to do the same, let alone differently, for our 26th event. But we are paying very close attention to what we're liking about what we're doing this year to see what we can preserve for the next time down the road.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of community, we've sort of put together this event. There's going to be hopefully thousands of people there, and each one of those people are going to have a chance to enjoy bonsai exhibits at the highest level in the country, as far as we're concerned. So,
and is that level as high as we want it to be? Is it as high as it will be 2 years from now? No, we want it to just get higher and higher and higher. But what we want to do is to provide people with the absolute best examples that we can today, and that by participating in an event like this, you're able to share your work with the community, and the community can enjoy your work and learn from your work. And if you just let other people do the participation, then we don't get your voice. And so we want as many voices as possible in this process. And we think that, actually, we know that by participating in events like this, it's one of the most awesome learning experiences, which really gets us into our goals for the judging of the exhibit, which we can talk a little bit about.
Yeah, participating is really challenging, actually, I have to say. I just to share like a little anecdote, I actually built 2 stands myself for 2 of my exhibits in last year's show, and
on top of everything,
right? Yeah, and a good friend of mine spent, I want to say, just weeks on end sourcing the right stands and accent plants and whatnot, and making sure that everything would go together and make a good display. So you can really push yourself by becoming involved in a show like this, because you might not even know when you submit the tree what all ends
what
up,
you're getting into.
Yeah, what you're getting into. I think it was kind of a gauntlet for new BIB students when we were back in the day when we were doing that show.
And the reason it worked, I think, as a club is the club existed to put on a show. The meetings were required, the workshops were required, participating in show planning meetings was required, let alone attendance at the exhibit itself. And so there was no day of the year when our focus wasn't on, why are we learning to do better bonsai? So our show trees look better. So our show looks better. Why are we studying display every single month? Why are we working collaboratively to put together trees from different people? Because it's not about what we're doing as much as a group of individuals, but as a collective, what is the best show that we can provide for the public? We very consciously decided for the Expo that we wanted people to be 100% responsible for their 6-foot space. That was actually at least for me, a very important part of the show. Because in BIB, we made sure we swapped stands, we swapped trees, we swapped accents because we wanted it to be good. My goal was to make sure that people had full responsibility so that they had the opportunity to learn every single one of those things, see what their peers are doing, and let them kind of learn how to raise the bar for themselves to produce better and better results over time.
So then back to the judging portion, because that's something that we actually practiced in BIB as well. And in a way, we're following the same model, but in a way we're not. So, we learned how to judge trees both individually and in exhibits in BIB. But I think that building a community of people who understand how to judge a tree, so many points for the trunk, so many points for the nabari, so many points for the matching the pot with the overall composition. How does the branching look? How does the silhouette look? All of these different quality aspects that we look at in our bonsai once we really get into it. Those are the things that we were learning. And just like the challenge of setting up your display, if you are an exhibitor who's accepted and you are invited to be a member of, you're a judge, you're qualified, you're not required. And so we want you as a community member to take away this, sort of an educational experience. If you don't already have these skills, you're going to build on them just by being in a room with a number of other highly qualified people. Bottom line is, if you're good enough to get one of your trees into the exhibit, And it doesn't matter how it got there. It doesn't matter whether you've owned it for a week or you've owned it for 27 years or longer. If it's in the exhibit, you did something right.
Yep.
And so we want you as a member of the community to learn from the experience of exhibiting, as well as also contribute to what other people are learning.
And if you find that there are gaps in your knowledge while you're judging those trees, well, then you're making a list for the kinds of things you can go to your teacher and say, how can I learn more about this? And so on that topic, we've been just thrilled just this year. The community is starting to produce the kinds of materials that can help people navigate these things. Just last month, Ryan Neal produced an awesome 2-hour lecture on what it means to contribute to exhibits as an exhibitor, as a jury member, or as a judge. He breaks down what goes into each of these roles and the challenges of each. And it's an absolutely awesome, it's the most detailed breakdown of the topic that I know of, and it's a fantastic resource.
Yeah, and so I think you have to be a member of Mirai Live in order to...
Yeah, probably a pro member to participate in that, but it's in the library, and it's just, if you're curious about that topic, we can highly recommend that.
Yes, definitely. I mean, Ryan has so much experience in terms of his knowledge from Japan, as well as his full-time nursery operation here,
and his participation in international events where he's adjudicated exhibits as well.
Right. So this is a great resource for people to see. And then I believe, Jonas, I wasn't aware of the other one that you were talking about, that Michael.
Yeah, just a few weeks ago, Michael Hagedorn and Andrew Robson hosted an intensive where the focus was all on show-related topics of display and evaluation. In other words, the kinds of information you need to succeed as an exhibitor. And so I think there's going to be more and more of these opportunities going forward. And I know, the two of us have talked about that a lot, about hosting these kinds of events. I don't know what we'll be able to whip up between now and the event, but I do have a whole lot of, blog posts planned on this topic. So writing a bunch of articles on what to look for in this kind of material, or how to approach judging these kinds of things, or what to think about when you're evaluating a new species. There's so many discrete blocks of knowledge that we want to try to cover as many of these as possible between now and the event, so that we can start creating this library that would enable our judging panels to be as educated as possible when it comes time to do an event like this. And by the way, all of these skills just kind of contribute to making you a better stylist, a better shopper. And if you ever coordinate events or play a role in your club, you might be able to make an event that better reflects what your goals are for it.
I was just going to say, I think, Jonas, you have given a number of programs, probably quite a few actually, in the last couple of years, that really discuss the two things you just mentioned, which is, how do I know what tree to buy? Like, how, as someone who is still in the learning process, do I know what tree to buy? That evaluation process is almost exactly the same as the evaluation process that you put into evaluating a show tree in a place like the Pacific Bonsai Expo or any other show. I mean, if there are, so the skills of analyzing the quality of the trunk, analyzing the quality of the nabari, and if you're shopping, maybe it's not in a show pot, but the evaluating the tree is exactly the same type of process. So when you go to clubs and give those programs, do you think that it really pushes forward the knowledge of the clubs that you're presenting them to?
Yes and no. Yes, in that I have yet to ever deliver a presentation anywhere related to the topic of evaluation without tons of lots of aha moments. But I think until you start doing that repeatedly, until it becomes a normal part of your practice, I don't know how much. It's like, I don't know that one workout is going to help someone win the bodybuilding show. But I think that we're providing the tools to help people do this on an ongoing basis. Now, I get a bunch of emails throughout the year of people shout out to Connecticut who just checked in, for the club show that they're about to host, they want to do an evaluation exercise. And so they reached out and said, hey, what are you guys doing in terms of judging? Could we look at the sheets or any resources you might have related to this? And I actually want to encourage you all to reach out when you have those kinds of questions, because it can encourage us to try to create the resources that you could use. A lot of these programs can be really successfully run without a ton of experience, because if the whole point is you're creating an environment for people to do critical thinking and then collaborate to work out what you actually think, you actually can do a lot of these programs without a guest speaker or an expert in the room. And so, yeah, it'd be great to get an expert to maybe kick it off or every once in a while as a tune-up, but these are things clubs can do on an ongoing basis.
And to that point, just to tie it back into the expo a little bit, I think that it's really important to acknowledge that at the average club event, I mean, I've been a member of the San Francisco group for 20 years, and at many club events, there aren't really great trees. There are trees that people are working on, and one or two sort of trees that maybe are getting towards refinement or whatever you want to call it. And so at the expo, you could take that opportunity as a group to come to the expo and really, even if you're not an exhibitor, just look around at the trees and do a formal judging practice, do a formal judging sort of exercise. And to that end, in the 2022 program, we actually left space at the back of the program for you to go through and judge the exhibit yourself.
We put a full judging form in.
Yeah.
And we're going to do that again this time.
So those are tools that the community can use in order to push forward their knowledge of just the judging process, even if you are not actually an exhibitor.
And we might be doing a program on the topic. We haven't totally figured out. We are going to be doing programs at this year's Expo. We're going to have more information on that soon when tickets go on sale. But we would love to make it easier for people to learn at exhibits. When I think about what are unique opportunities that exhibits afford the visitors, the number one things are to study display and to study trees dressed up at their absolute best. And so they, just as you said, as a group, we recommend that you all, like as a club, get someone to give a tour of the exhibit. Like we do docent tours throughout the weekend, but you can organize your own tours with really specific focuses. We're just going to look at the junipers. We're just going to look at the display. We're just going to look at the accents. There's so many ways to learn in person that you just can't do at other events. And so I think of it as a fairly precious thing when you can be in a room of great trees. And that's why we've taken the effort to go to Japan. We've both seen exhibits in Europe. We've seen exhibits all over this country. And it's because it's the kind of thing you just can't do elsewhere. Yes, I've seen beautiful trees in beautiful gardens, but it just doesn't look the same on a bench next to all the other trees. When you get the right pot, when you clean that pot up, when you get it on the right stand, when you have a nice backdrop, it's all lit well, and then every last detail on that tree has been cleaned. There's no dead leaves anywhere. The wiring is on point. If there's any wire on the tree, or at least it had been wired, every last little detail cleaned up. Actually, yeah, what am I thinking ever wanting to show more than one tree in an event? That's a lot.
I only have one. I only submitted one tree to the jury this year, partly because I knew I was going to have a lot of responsibilities that I had to take care of, but also because I had so many in the exhibit last time that I just felt like, oh my God, that was so much work.
Yeah, I had submitted 3 trees this year, and then that number has just dropped down to 2. And I thought, my knee-jerk response is, looking around the garden and see what else I could put in the show. And I'm like, wait a minute, like virtually slapping myself in the face. What are you thinking? You're not going to have time to prep 1 tree, let alone 2. 2 might be more than enough if they happen to get in. So it's just one more thing on top of a lot, because we're really clear it's going to take, okay, is the pot correct? Do we have the right stand for it? What is the accent going to be? If it's medium size, what's the second tree going to be? Prep that tree, prep that pot, then start on the accent in the accent pot.
So on the theme of, kind of talking about community evaluation and how we talk about trees, how we talk about quality of trees, that sort of thing. So I think we pretty purposefully said, hey, we're going to have a really big sample size here in terms of expertise in the room for the actual judging. So essentially, even though each tree is only judged with a single number, 1 through 5, at least last time, and we had 45 people telling us, was it 45? I think telling us basically 1 through 5. I think 5, I think this is very exceptional. 4, this is very good, whatever it is, however they interpret those numbers, and then Z scoring the each individual judging sheet and averaging those out. How do you think that compares to a different approach, which was taken at the Artisans Cup to use 5 professional judges and a very large number for each. I thought, was it 65 points?
Or even more than I forget. It was a big number.
I like, in my mind, okay, I'm not a mathematician, but in my mind, it's almost like it's the same thing. You have 65 points coming from 5 different people, or 5 points coming from 65 different people. I don't know.
Yeah, and there's a couple ways of looking at it. One is, how granular a distinction do you need to arbitrate, between one tree and another? It would be really hard for me to say with a straight face, 100% in all possible cases, that tree's a 41 and that's a 42, and I'm going to quit if you don't accept those scores. I just can't say that that's ever going to be a meaningful difference between a 41 and a 42.
Well, except that on the BIB judging sheet, it was a scale of like 30, right? And it was broken down into 10 points.
But that one was broken down, and that one's a lot more justifiable, because then we weren't asked to give a holistic picture of a tree. We're asked to fill out a form. And there's good and bad things about it. I think that's the absolute best approach. And we'll explain this a little better for those who haven't seen it. And we might link to an article that shows a picture of the judging form, but where you assign a score for each kind of atomistic component of the tree: a trunk, a root, the branch, the pot, and then the overall kind of sensibility of the display. And when you're answering those questions, it kind of forces you into a score. Whereas when you're just given 100 numbers and you can describe them any way you want, that's tough to be consistent. In fact, we actually talk to people who study evaluation for a living, and that's one thing that led us to go with such a small scale. Is a lot of people wanted more points. And as you noted, I didn't see a lot of evidence that we need to give people more points to do a finer scale of judging, because with so many judges, it's not as important to pick up the difference between a 6 or 7 on a scale of 1 to 10. Our overall numbers give us that.
We were also very concerned that the judges would disregard on a 10-point scale. They would just completely disregard 1, 2, and 3 because,
yes,
hey, every tree in this room is really good, and none of these deserve a 1, 2, and a 3. But in a judging exercise, using the entire spectrum of the scores that you have available, and literally giving the worst tree in the room, even though it's better than any tree that you might have in your yard of that species or whatever, even though you might think that's a great tree, if it's not the best tree in the room, use the judging as a tool to distinguish between the trees that you think should be recognized as the winners and trees that you don't think should be recognized.
That's right. We highly recommended to the judges before the event last time, and they still didn't take us up on it. Many did, but we gave people 5 points they could award, and we very highly recommended they use all 5. There's a lot of ways you can apply point scales, and because of the Z-scoring, we can compare the scale whatever you decide to do with your votes. But 5 actually gives you a lot of good categories. You've got, if 3 is the average tree in the room, and then you've got just one set of distinctions for below average trees and one set of distinctions for above average trees. And we also are giving people only on average just over 1 minute per tree to rationally consider 75 trees. And I will say that, having measured this a lot of different ways, the order in which people judge trees affect their scores, and the amount of time they have affects their scores, and those have a much bigger effect than the actual scale you give them to select from.
So, I mean, that part about the order being something basically like decision fatigue, like if your overall impression is that it's a good show, all your last scores are going to be really good, and your first scores are all going to be lower because you don't know if it's going to be higher or lower, so you're going to more likely be towards the middle. These are like well-known biases that people who count this stuff for a living can tell you the names of. I forget the names. But so does that mean that we have to have everyone score the score of the show in order, and then in reverse order, and then in random order? So
we actually thought this through, and what we did is we made everybody stand in front of one of their trees, start judging there, and then go in whatever order they wanted.
So it was basically random.
Yeah. And so we could, because we'll have fewer exhibitors than we have exhibits, because some people have more than one tree in the show, and we're limiting that to no more than 3 per person. And honestly, based on the submissions, not many people are going to have multiple trees in the show. It's not going to be 10 people with 3 trees each. That's not what's going to fill up the room. It's going to be a good mix of people. And so just getting people to start at different places in the room, we had everyone spread out through the room. Most people just started going up and down aisles from where they were, and that alone is enough to bleed off a lot of that initial bias. Plus, the exhibitors had been in the room during the previous 2 days, so they've seen the trees in the room. They've started thinking about this a little bit. And then when you give them the pencil and the paper, then it's like, okay, time to make that decision. And I'd say sometimes it was really easy to give a score, and sometimes it was really hard.
I think I struggled a little bit towards the end, just trying to figure out like what were all the numbers that I was writing down actually going to mean in the end. Because if you just stand in front of a tree and you score it 1 to 5, that's one thing, but it's not answering the question, which one of these trees do I want to win?
That's right? Exactly right.
So like in the end, for a couple of the categories, I actually went back and looked at each tree in that category and said, wait, which one of these do I actually want to win? Because that's the one that I need to give the 5 to. And if I don't want it to win, then I need to give it a lower score, not just another 5, because otherwise I'm just saying, yeah, either one is fine.
That's right. When I was looking at the contenders, I looked at those as a group within a category. Some categories were more straightforward than others. And I actually asked myself, do I want to state an opinion about the winner or not? And it's interesting because if you decide to give them both 4s or both 5s or all 3 or 4 of them the same score, then what you're saying is other people are going to make the decision for you. And maybe you think that they both deserve 5s because your job's to give it a 4 or a 5 if it's a contender, say. But when you do find true reason that one tree rises above the other, then yeah, we definitely hope that you'd give that a 5 or a 4, depending.
So we had a lot of discussion about the display being 100% the responsibility of the exhibitor. It's not us, the organizers are providing a backdrop and a table, and basically everything else there is the responsibility of the exhibitor. There were a couple of things that ended up being kind of not controlled by the exhibitors in the first iteration. Yes. One of which was for extra large trees, we ended up putting them on larger tables. And what's your takeaway in terms of, did that have an effect on the judging? And was it a mistake on our part to allow there to be a distinction within a category?
Where within the same category, trees were on different sized tables.
Exactly.
And I would say I'm really glad we did it that way, because had we not, we would not have learned the lesson that could definitely form a bias on behalf of a lot of people.
But the question is, was it the fact that the bigger trees are actually more impressive and better, or was it the fact that they were on a bigger table? That's a hard question to answer.
Or was it just plain, people like raw bigness?
Right.
Which is, that other form of bias. Yeah, all of those things. Being on the avenue of giants is one potential form of bias. I thought you were going to say the light, the way it hit different trees.
I was going to say that as well. I just haven't gotten to it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's another obvious one. There were a handful of trees that just happened to receive the most absolutely amazing natural light on them.
At the exact time that we were doing the judging.
Exactly, because we did it the afternoon when the sun was low, and it just happened to bathe a few trees in glorious golden light. And one of those trees won an award.
I think more than one.
Actually, a couple of them did. That's right.
Yeah.
And so, I bet, I don't know that the results would have been different, but I bet it did have an effect.
So, to people's question, like I'm sure all kinds of questions come up in terms of discussing these numbers and the results from 2022 and changes that we haven't locked in every little bit and piece of what we're going to do for judging in 2024. But, I think you like to talk about the math a little bit and, running alternate scenarios, because all of the numbers were crunched by a computer multiple ways, and you could do subsets and look at, well, okay, if we just take, these 10 judges versus the entire pool, what does that give you a different result?
Yeah. And it's funny because none of my interest is in the math. It's just that I was responsible for coming up with the math that did that. And that's why it was a source of stress all that year. And that's why we thank Dan Yammons for helping out with that. Like that, the work he did to help out with the Artisans Cup, kind of after the fact, was absolutely fantastic. And that was kind of our starting point. But Yeah, we've thought a lot about that. And we've thought about how to tweak it, and we've thought about how to educate people, and we've thought about how to reduce biases. And I think we've taken a handful of concrete steps this time that will get us in a position where we can learn new stuff this year. We haven't 100% set our layout for the show yet, and it's really hard to come up with a layout that's perfectly equal to every tree, because we just don't know how that's even going to come out yet, so we don't have a lot to comment on it. But there's only windows on one side of the room that might affect how the lighting looks, for instance. Some rows may be longer than others. Some might be oriented one way toward the middle of the room or the outside of the room. Will that affect judging? I don't know.
I don't think so, but we did eliminate the one thing that we just
The
talked
biggest
about,
one, which is the size of the table.
So splitting the large category into two, large and extra large, where large is up to 64 inches total height plus width. Those go on the 6-foot tables, like we mentioned in the last podcast, and the extra large go in on the 8-foot tables. And there's no choice. There's no, you don't get to choose which size table that you go on. It's based on which category you land in.
Right.
That's
and we're going to
make
make
judging.
And as the organizers, we're going to make the final determinations for that, which we kind of have to do ahead of time as we're setting the show. There will be a number of trees that are right on that line, and we're just going to have to make a judgment call about what we think makes the most sense on an 8-foot table versus what makes the most sense on a 6-foot table. And so we'll be looking at how many trees are in the given categories and what the kind of perspective on the tree is to see where it fits. But that's the idea. Because I think a couple trees are coming in on that number.
I think so. There's one other thing that we haven't discussed, which I think is relevant to this, and that is that last time the Best in Show award was determined by a completely different type of question.
Yeah.
And we have not really, we've discussed it ad nauseum almost, how it was so interesting to see the different results based on we're asking you to score this tree 1 to 5 versus which tree do you want to win Best in Show? Those are two completely different questions. And we got different answers from people. So, I mean, in terms of judging, what do you think that says? And what do you think, how can we like better serve the community in terms of it, like use that as a tool to teach people things?
And this came up actually from Andrew just recently, where he was recommending that we actually keep the two prizes separate, as opposed to leave open the opportunity for having the same tree win both awards.
Meaning the Best in Show would also be determined by the scores.
Right. No, meaning that you are eligible for winning Best in Show and a category award. In the Sakufu exhibit, for example, there's a Best in Show and a Best Conifer and a Best Deciduous, or Best Zoki, the best other. And so in every case, you're giving out one more prize to another tree.
So I think the counter argument to that is that, well, one, everybody says that, the best conifer ends up being the second best conifer, and the best conifer ends up being Best in Show.
And then you matter what's more important, what people say, recognizing more people, more educational recognition of things. I think it's just trade-offs. We just get to pick which one sounds good. And Eric and I haven't talked about this one ahead of time. Eric did not know I'd be asking about this, but Andrew just brought it up last week.
I can't get past the fascinating sort of differences between asking people to score a tree 1 to 5 and asking people which tree is the best one in the room. Those two things, objectively should give you the same result, and they don't.
They don't. It's because the phrase Best in Show creates criteria in our head that differs from Best Conifer. And that's fascinating.
I think that's what makes it so interesting, is that the whole idea of judging is such a psychology kind of experiment. Like you're asking someone to evaluate something, that in order to do that, not only do they have to have experience in what they're evaluating, you have to take into account the way that their brain works. I mean, this is not something that's just easily solvable in terms of you do this as a robot.
That's right. So in the field of evaluation, one of the absolute biggest problems in any context is it's extremely hard to find human beings who can be consistent at their judging. It's extremely hard to find that. Even if you have all of the training and you know everything there is to know about bonsai, that's a different skill than being the type of human being who can be given an arbitrary number of decisions to make and to make them with great consistency, however they're presented. That's just needle in haystack.
So the two different things we're talking about are the skill of understanding quality in bonsai and the skill of judging. Those are so different, such a different sort of mindset.
And in terms of the judging as bonsai, I wouldn't actually argue that anyone in the bonsai community is equally adept at every category of tree. No one is as familiar with shohin display as they are with deadwood preparation. No one is familiar with the patterns of branch structures on some kinds of broadleaf evergreens as they are with the patterns of branches on deciduous trees. There are so many species that go so deep. We have people that are awesomely experienced and broad in their understanding of these things, but I don't pretend that anyone would be equally adept across the board. And that's why I think the more that relies on individual judgment, the more variable the judging becomes, let alone bias.
Right. But if you look at judging of shows in Japan, and I actually don't know very much on this topic, because I was never an apprentice and I didn't get into the weeds in terms of how those are actually done. It seems like there's quite a few different approaches.
Mm-hmm. Oh, definitely.
And so there's no single one best approach. Like if there was a best approach, don't you think that as a group that they would have decided, okay, that's it?
Well, I will also say that there are two other variables to consider, and one is simply resources. The best approach is one. So what is your goal for recognition? If you want the closest thing to an objective, quote, best, based on whatever someone's construction of best happens to be, you need to train a large pool of people with an incredibly specific bunch of criteria and have enough of those people all following the same operating instructions to come up with good numbers. And that's kind of your Kokufu approach. Whereas I love the approach to Taikon 10, and I actually would rather move toward doing something like that. But there's one basic problem with that, which we can get to. And that is where the organizers of the show pull the top 3 trees in every category, and the judges, who are definitely not bonsai experts, no one will ever accuse them of that. Politicians, just fancy people, it's a mix of people. There are some bonsai professionals in the group as well, but they will pick from among those 3 that have been selected for them. I actually really wanted that for the first Expo, but I never once pushed it because who gets to pick those top 3 trees? And that's the hardest part.
I remember that being something.
None of us took that seriously. We're like, how do we do that?
Well, but in BIB, the same thing happened,
That's right. And we had a teacher, Boone, he did it.
So he would pull trees out of the exhibit and say, okay, these are the 3 best trees in this category. And I'm like looking around like, does everybody agree that these are the 3 best trees in this category? Like, why does
they didn't? If their tree wasn't there, they didn't agree for the most part.
Well, but that begs the question, is Boone actually 1, right, and 2, objective?
And do we share the same objective thing? Because I believe that it's not even as black and white as there is an objective answer in a lot of those things.
I think we're just about so far down in the weeds at this point.
Yeah, I kind of feel sorry for the last 8 people that are paying attention, and it's probably only 2, but we don't run ads, so at least there's that, We love this just because that was one of the most fun things we did all year, was get to score the show. And I actually picked the trees that would get judged a lot of the time, but Boone always had to make the final say. I would just say, oh, so that would be this, that, and that for that category, or that, and that. And then I would go physically pull the trees, and Boone would amend that. Once in a while, we'd have a 4th tree. Once in a while, we might just have 2 trees. It's so much easier to give people time and to look at trees outside of their displays in a neutral environment and just say, look at that, 3 trees on a stand, or not even on stands, but like just 3 trees on a table.
Yeah, they were just on a table.
And they're just sitting there, and you could just do ordinals. Pick your number 1, number 2, number 3.
So, but then if you take the example you started with Taikon 10 and BIB, we're completely discounting the display itself and all of the other elements of the display, even if one of them was another tree. Whereas in the Expo in 2022, we actually saw that the displays definitely had some impact on the judging.
Yeah, and on that score, you can think about how they do it in Japan, where getting things like the details of your display matter a lot in Japan, but they matter more when you don't get it right than they do when you get it right.
It's almost like rubber stamping. Is that what you're saying?
It's like your moss work better be on point. That accent better not be stupid. Your container selection should not be lazy, and your stand selection shouldn't be arbitrary, because literally any one of those, if you break that, you don't get that prize. But is anything special going into those? I don't know. It's expected at that level of a show that you're going to get that right. And that's why they're not kind when people don't get those things right. Now, I've heard a lot of people talk about that both here and in Japan, but I will also say a lot of trees win because they, and don't need to get into the politicking and whether or not the judging is even clean in the first place. That's a different topic. But I will say, the work is not always fantastic, meaning the wiring, the pruning, the detail work is not always fantastic on Kokufu Prize winning trees, but the trees are truly spectacular historical trees.
Right. Like they're
Like
giving the
losers
award,
don't tend to win Kokufu prizes.
But are you saying that they're giving the award more for the long history and the health of the tree than the branch work?
More like the branch work didn't seem to make or break the difference in that case.
Because of,
and so I've been told everything needs to be perfect and right where it should be. But I've also seen trees where I just thought, wow, did they mean to wire it like that? Like, was that on purpose? Seriously, on prize winning trees in Kokufu. But they're spectacular trees. They just may not be in the hands of the most, skilled person. Like I just don't know what led up to those things, whether it was an apprentice working on that thing or a customer working on it. Who knows what it could have been? I can imagine a lot of things. But it's not that the tree wasn't deserving. It just may not have checked every single box that you can check. We're just honestly hoping that we can start teaching people what these boxes are to check and how to check them, because that's our goal, is to get people to where they're asking better questions about how they can choose better pots, how they can find better stands, how they can create more meaningful displays, and what good moss work actually looks like. Like, we haven't even scratched the surface of that topic, and the Expo was not a world-class example of any of those things.
So, I mean, to that point, you and I have discussed mostly just in passing the idea of kind of having the Expo supported by potentially like study groups or something where we would replicate this exercise of practicing display and practicing evaluation. I mean,
we're kind of making a case for it.
Yeah, it's hard not to it's hard to say, hey, you need to learn this, and then not give somebody a way to learn it.
That's right. Which is why we're trying to convince ourselves what it's going to take for us to offer some support on these topics. And one thing I know I'll have time for this year is writing on the topic. It'll be a starting point for creating a curriculum around this. I think there will be more classes. I don't know if we'll get to it this year. We're looking at each other, shrugging. We would love to put on a couple weekend intensives where we cover these topics. And actually, if any of you are listening or interested in this, let us know, because this is the kind of thing I think we could probably break some time into our schedule to try to do this, where we spend a day focusing on evaluation and a day on display. I think that would be a super duper fun and valuable exercise.
I mean, we could do sample setups like we did in BIB and film it, and I could put it up on YouTube. But the problem with YouTube is the algorithm has a habit of burying things. But we could put the video somewhere where you could find it.
Yeah, if we do make videos, we'll definitely be linking to that from Expo Assets, so you can find those things. But the fun is when you can do it in person. And so, yeah, we'll probably have a combination of written resources, video resources, as well as we might do something in person as well. Because I know between us, we've got plenty of trees, containers, stands, and other things that can help set these things up. And actually, if you're looking for help with any of that, with your submissions, let whatever professional you work with, if any, know, hey, is this pot going to make the cut? Is this stand good enough? Where can I go? What are my options? Yeah. We actually connected a lot of people to pot stands and accents last year, and we expect to do even more of that this year.
And you really should be thinking about every single aspect of your display as an accepted exhibitor, even if that means, I mean, the show's in late October, so in most places that means you could do a fall repot on many species, and that means that you could swap out the pot still before the exhibit, and obviously, whatever stand you come up with. But accent plants, that's a whole nother topic. You probably need to plan a little bit ahead for that.
Yeah, the best accent plants were not made the day before the show.
All right. Well, we're well off the judging topic at this point. Do you want to?
But on the judging note, what's funny is at some level, based on our background in BIB, when we're thinking about adjudicating an event, is we're taking for granted that you know how to get the container right and that it's cleaned properly and that it has appropriate age and design for the tree. We're taking it for granted that you know how to moss your trees and you know what top dressings are appropriate. And that's actually a really neglected but oddly deep topic, as silly and superficial as it is. There's a lot of ways to get moss or top dressing work wrong. A lot of ways.
The surface of show prep.
Yeah. And same thing for stands. We're taking it for granted that you all know that. And we know that the average exhibitor does not know all of that stuff. But that's what we're thinking when we approach judging the show. And so, although I'm not on the jury, if one of my trees is in the show, I will be a judge. And all of those things are going to be on my mind as we're walking up and down the aisles.
Well, I'm just looking forward first to the jury process because...
Yes, yeah. Timing wise, on a technical note, we are a little behind where we thought we'd be. And so we will be getting everything to the jury very soon. And that we expect to be announcing the results in June.
I think that's going to be it.
All right. Thank you all so much for joining in.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
The music on today's podcast was brought to you by the fine folks at Blue Dot Sessions. Check them out at www.sessions.blue.